Welcome to Living Beyond the Invisible, a walk with Heather. I'm Heather Perrin, and this is the space where we will pull back the curtain on life with invisible disabilities. Each week, we'll explore the realities of chronic illness, the challenges that often go unseen, and the strength it takes to keep moving forward. Whether you're living with an invisible disability yourself, supporting someone who is, or just wanting to understand more, you're in the right place. Let's take this walk together. When most people think about illness, they tend to think about it in singular terms. Someone has diabetes, someone has asthma, someone has arthritis or ADHD. One diagnosis, one condition, one explanation. But for many people living with invisible illnesses, disabilities, or chronic health conditions, that isn't how reality works at all. In reality, it's often rarely just one thing. Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Heather. Today we're talking about comorbidities, what they are, why they happen, why they are so common among people with chronic illnesses and disabilities, and most importantly, why understanding them can completely change how we think about health, treatment, and even our own self-worth. If you've ever found yourself sitting in a doctor's office wondering how you somehow ended up collecting diagnoses like their trading cards, this episode is probably for you. If you've ever thought, why can't I have just one thing wrong with me? Then this episode is absolutely for you. And if you've ever felt frustrated because people seem to understand one diagnosis but completely miss the fact that you're juggling 2, 3, 5, 6, 10 different conditions at the same time, then I hope today's conversation helps you to feel a little more seen and a bit more validated. So let's start with the basics. A comorbidity is the presence of 2 or more medical conditions occurring in the same person. These conditions may be related to one another. They may share underlying biological mechanisms, or they may simply occur together more frequently than could be predicted. For example, someone might have ADHD and anxiety, or ADHD and autism. Someone might have migraines and fibromyalgia. Another person may have autoimmune thyroid disease, chronic fatigue, and depression. Someone may live with autism, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, POTS, mast cell activation syndrome, and chronic pain. These combinations are not unusual. In fact, they are remarkably common. I myself have several different diagnoses, and a couple that are not official diagnosis, but they're there. When you have a CHD like I do, ADHD, autism, PTSD, anxiety, and a bunch of other things can commonly be diagnosed as well. It's possibly due to the lack of oxygen at birth or the trauma you lived through from the very beginning of your life. And, I have ADHD and likely have autism, and while I don't have an official PTSD diagnosis, it's there. We know it's there. But I also live with fibromyalgia, osteoarthritis, osteopenia, and I'm a breast cancer survivor on top of it. So, that's all added together, and a lot of it is truly believed to have stemmed from my congenital heart defect. No, I don't have proof of that, but that is what everyone thinks. So there's that. But the reality is that the human body is not a collection of isolated systems operating independently from one another. The brain influences the immune system. The immune system affects the nervous system. Hormones influence both. The digestive system communicates directly with the brain. Sleep affects inflammation. Stress affects nearly every organ system in the body. Like I said, everything is connected. And because of this, when one system begins struggling, other systems often become affected as well. This concept is something modern medicine is increasingly recognizing. Historically, healthcare often approached the body in separate compartments. Cardiology handled the heart, neurology handled the brain, rheumatology handled autoimmune disease, psychiatry handled mental health, etc., etc. While specialization is incredibly important and needed, many patients find themselves falling into the gaps between specialties because their conditions don't stay neatly confined within that one body system. Instead, they experience a complex web of symptoms that influence one another. One example is the relationship between chronic pain and mental health. Research consistently shows that people living with chronic pain are more likely to experience anxiety and depression. I know I do. Now, this doesn't mean that the pain is all in our heads. In fact, neuroscience shows that chronic pain and emotional distress share overlapping neural pathways within the brain. So it's definitely not all in our heads. When pain signals continue for long periods, they affect areas of the brain involved in mood, attention, stress regulation, and emotional processing. Likewise, anxiety and depression can increase pain sensitivity through changes in the nervous system. The conditions influence one another in both directions. Another example involves autoimmune diseases. Individuals diagnosed with one autoimmune condition have significantly increased the likelihood of developing additional autoimmune diseases. Scientists believe this occurs because of shared genetic predispositions, immune system dysregulation, and environmental triggers. Someone diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, I practiced that and still didn't say it right. It's okay. They may later develop rheumatoid arthritis, celiac disease, lupus, or another autoimmune condition. It's not because they're unlucky, it's not something they're doing wrong, but it's because the same underlying immune system dysfunction may contribute to multiple conditions. I have fibromyalgia, and it is, pretty often that someone with fibromyalgia eventually gets diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis or lupus. Now, as of right now, fibro is not classified as an autoimmune disorder. However, there are studies over in the UK that state it should be. So hopefully our healthcare system catches up with that soon, and maybe we can find some more treatments for those of us suffering fibromyalgia other than being told to just lose weight and exercise, because those things do not help. Spoiler alert if you didn't know that. They don't help. Anyway, back to our regularly scheduled podcast before I get off on a tangent. This pattern appears throughout medicine. People with ADHD frequently experience anxiety disorders. Autistic individuals often have co-occurring anxiety, gastrointestinal disorders, sleep disturbances, connective tissue disorders, or sensory processing challenges. Individuals with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome commonly experience dysautonomia, I did not say that right, and I am so sorry, chronic pain, gastrointestinal dysfunction, migraines, and mast cell disorders. I practice these big words and I still mess them up. I'm blaming brain fog, which is bad today, as usual. People living with obesity may experience sleep apnea, insulin resistance, cardiovascular disease, and joint problems. Now, I want to flip that around, and I'm going off script for a second. I do want to flip that around. Sometimes having those things makes obesity harder. When you live with a chronic or invisible disability, it is hard to lose weight because you struggle with pain and fatigue and all of the things that just make it so much harder to exercise, to get up and move, to do all of the things you're supposed to do. And you can eat 100% perfectly and still not lose weight if you're not moving. And if you're in a lot of pain, moving is difficult. So please keep that in mind when you see someone who's overweight and you think, gosh, they're just not doing enough. No, I promise that is not true. Most of us are trying as hard as we can and still struggling. Anyway, back to our regularly scripted podcast now. I promise I will try to stop having random tangents. But you guys know me better than that by now. The more researchers study chronic illness, the more they discover that many conditions are interconnected rather than isolated. This understanding can be both validating and very frustrating. It's validating because it explains why symptoms don't always fit neatly into a single diagnosis. But it's also frustrating because many healthcare systems are still structured around finding one explanation for a person's symptoms. I've dealt with that a lot. Patients often spend years being told that their symptoms don't make sense because no single diagnosis explains everything they're experiencing. I have had that experience as well. I'm told that they don't know what's wrong with me because I don't fit neatly into a single mold, or they act like I'm making it all up, which really irritates me because the truth is that sometimes no single diagnosis exists. Sometimes multiple conditions are interacting simultaneously, and that can create a diagnostic puzzle that takes years to untangle. Sometimes it's never truly untangled. And for many people living with invisible disabilities, receiving a diagnosis is just the beginning. The diagnosis often opens the door to discovering additional conditions that were hiding beneath the surface. This experience can feel overwhelming. Trust me, I know that well. To be honest, I've lived with a CHD my whole life, and I have struggled with a lot of things for a lot of years. It wasn't until I had my breast cancer and went through chemo and all of that, and that opened up everything, that I finally found doctors that were willing to listen to me. And that's when I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. Now, I was already diagnosed with the osteoarthritis, but that's when I was diagnosed with the fibromyalgia, and then the sleep apnea, and then, it's just like a snowball effect. It keeps going. So it seems like I have been diagnosed with a lot of things in a very short amount of time, but the truth is I've been trying and fighting for them to be diagnosed for years. It just took finding the right doctor. And then when you finally get an answer, you discover that there are just more questions than there actually are answers. So finally you understand one piece of the puzzle, only to realize there are likely 10 more pieces scattered across the table. You think you've got that puzzle figured out, and then bam, you're missing pieces. Many people experience grief during the process. There is grief in realizing your health challenges are more complex than you initially believed. Grief in recognizing that treatment may not be as simple as taking one medication or following one plan. There is grief in understanding that managing health may become a lifelong journey. But there is also something incredibly important that I need you to remember. More diagnoses do not mean you are getting sicker. Sometimes more diagnoses mean you are finally getting answers. For years, symptoms may have existed without explanation. That's how it was with me. The conditions were already there. The diagnoses were simply provide names for experiences you've been living with all along. Sorry, I got tongue-tied there. Understanding this distinction is important because many people feel discouraged when additional diagnoses appear. They think things are getting worse. Sometimes what is actually happening is that knowledge is improving. And guys, knowledge can be empowering. When doctors understand the full picture, treatment can become more targeted and effective. I joined targeted and effective there in one word. Sorry about that. When patients understand the connections between conditions, they can make more informed decisions about self-care and symptom management. Another reason comorbidities matter is because symptoms often overlap. Fatigue is the perfect example. Fatigue can be caused by autoimmune disease, sleep disorders, anemia, depression, chronic pain, dysautonomia, thyroid disease, medication side effects, nutritional deficiencies, neurological conditions, and countless other factors. If a physician assumes fatigue comes from only one diagnosis, important contributors may be 100% missed. This is why comprehensive care matters so very much. Healthcare providers have to look beyond individual symptoms and examine how conditions interact. Unfortunately, many of them don't, so you need to fight to make sure that they do. And if one won't, then you need to find somebody who will. And let me tell you, that same exact principle applies to patients. Many people blame themselves when symptoms persist despite treatment. They wonder why they aren't improving. They question whether they're doing something wrong. But sometimes the issue is not effort. Sometimes multiple conditions are influencing one another simultaneously, like we've talked about. A treatment that helps one condition may not really address another, or it could very well make it worse. That is a possibility as well. Understanding comorbidities can help reduce self-blame and create more realistic expectations. And there's another important scientific concept worth discussing here, and that's chronic inflammation. Researchers have increasingly identified chronic low-grade inflammation as a contributing factor to numerous conditions, including cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disorders, depression, diabetes, neurodegenerative diseases, and chronic pain syndromes. Inflammation is a normal and necessary immune response. However, when inflammatory processes remain active for extended periods, they can contribute to dysfunction throughout the body. This is one reason why so many chronic conditions appear interconnected. The same biological processes may be influencing multiple body systems simultaneously. Another factor involves the autonomic nervous system, which controls functions such as heart rate, blood pressure, digestion, breathing, and temperature regulation. When autonomic dysfunction occurs, symptoms can appear in different organ systems. Someone may experience dizziness, fatigue, gastrointestinal issues, heart palpitations, exercise intolerance, temperature sensitivity, and brain fog. At first, these symptoms may seem unrelated. In reality, they may all stem from nervous system dysregulation. And again, it isn't just one thing. It's rarely one thing. One of the most difficult parts with living with multiple conditions is explaining them to other people. Because again, like I said at the beginning, most people understand one single diagnosis, but they don't understand multiple diagnoses because that can be harder for them to conceptualize. And then, so that means that some of us that are living with these conditions encounter skepticism. They assume we are exaggerating. They question how someone could possibly have that many conditions. And unfortunately, this misunderstanding can create significant emotional distress for those of us living with these conditions. Because people living with comorbidities often find tremendous amounts of energy educating others about their health to be exhausting. When you're dealing with multiple conditions that already cause fatigue and exhaustion, and then you have to keep explaining and educating to everyone over and over why you have multiple conditions, it's exhausting. And sometimes it gets really old. So people living with these conditions become experts in their own conditions because they have to. Not because they want to, but because they have to advocate for themselves. They have to learn medical terminology, treatment options, symptom tracking, medication interactions, and research findings simply to, push for themselves to make sure they are treated the way they should be. This is emotional labor that often goes very unseen by most people. As we talked about neurodivergent burnout last week, this is something that can absolutely contribute to that burnout because managing one chronic condition is difficult. I am not saying it's not, but managing multiple conditions simultaneously requires an extraordinary amount of coordination, planning, and resilience. Appointments increase, medications increase, insurance challenges increase, lifestyle adjustments increase, the mental load increases. Yet many people continue carrying these responsibilities while working, parenting, caregiving, studying, and maintaining relationships. That level of resilience deserves all the recognition, all the praise, and all of the applause. I promise. I'm not trying to give myself a pat on the back, I promise. But everyone living with multiple invisible disabilities definitely deserves a pat on the back because it's not easy. I also think it's important to talk about faith here because chronic illness can raise difficult questions. Many people wonder why their health challenges seem so complex. They pray for answers and receive another diagnosis. They hope one treatment will solve everything, only to discover additional layers beneath the surface. It can be discouraging, absolutely. But one thing I've learned from talking with so many people living with invisible disabilities is that resilience often grows in places that we never expected. Strength doesn't always look like overcoming every challenge. Sometimes strength looks like continuing to show up despite uncertainty. Sometimes strength looks like advocating for yourself when you're exhausted. Sometimes strength looks like learning to live a meaningful life even when health remains complicated. The Bible is filled with examples of people navigating uncertainty. Rarely were their journeys simple or straightforward. Life was often messy, confusing, and filled with unanswered questions. Yet, again and again, we see reminders that human worth is not determined by physical perfection. Our value does not disappear because our health becomes complicated. Our purpose does not vanish because our bodies require extra support, and our dignity remains intact even when we need accommodations, treatments, medications, mobility aids, or assistance from others. If you're listening today and you feel frustrated by the complexity of your health, I want you to know that your frustration is understandable. Managing multiple conditions is hard. Navigating those symptoms that overlap and interact is hard. Advocating for yourself when providers don't always see the full picture is hard. There is nothing weak about acknowledging that reality. But I also want to remind you that complexity does not mean hopelessness. Medicine continues advancing. Researchers continue discovering connections between conditions. Patients continue building communities that share knowledge and support. And every answer gained brings us one step closer to better understanding. Most importantly, remember that you are more than your diagnosis. Whether you have one condition or 10, your identity extends far beyond your medical chart. You are not a collection of symptoms or a list of diagnoses. You are a whole person with dreams, talents, relationships, strengths, and purpose. Comorbidities may shape part of your story, but they do not define the entirety of it. Thank you for joining me today on Living Beyond the Invisible, A Walk with Heather. If this episode resonated with you, remember, you're not alone on this journey. You can connect with me on Facebook and TikTok, where I share more encouragement, advocacy, and behind-the-scenes glimpses of life with invisible disabilities. And if you'd like to support the podcast and gain access to exclusive content, you can also join me on Patreon. All of those links are in the show notes. Until next time, take gentle care of yourself, and I'll see you next week.